The physicians call it anesthesia, pain and numbness. Your nerves are dying, but before they go silent, they scream. Imagine your hand plunged into boiling water, but when you look down, there is no water, no wound, just pale skin that refuses to feel anything except agony that has no source and no cure. This was the daily reality for a boy who would become king at 13, not because he was chosen by God, not because he was the strongest but because everyone else in line for the throne had already died, and kingdoms do not wait for better candidates. The year is 1174. Jerusalem is a city built on layers of conquest, each stone mortared with the blood of previous owners. The Crusader kingdom is barely 70 years old, a thin Christian skin stretched over a body that remembers being Muslim, Jewish, Roman, and a dozen empires before that. It is unstable. It is surrounded. And now it is about to be ruled by a teenager whose body is eating itself alive. Before we descend into the medical horror and political nightmare of Baldwin's reign, if you're drawn to history that doesn't soften the edges, consider subscribing to Master Historians. We don't romanticize the past. We excavate it. And if you're listening from somewhere in the world right now, drop a comment and tell me where. It's strange to think we're connected across centuries and continents by the story of a boy who couldn't feel his own hand. The disease announces itself slowly, then all at once. In 1169, 5 years before his coronation, Baldwin is 8 years old. He is playing with other noble children in the palace courtyard in Jerusalem. They have invented a game that would make modern parents recoil. They dig their fingernails into each other's forearms, dragging the nails down the skin, seeing who breaks first, who cries, who pulls away. It is a test of endurance disguised as play. Every boy screams eventually, every boy except one. William of Tyre, the court tutor and chronicler, watches this game with growing unease. He sees young Baldwin standing there, arm extended, while another child claws at his flesh hard enough to leave white trenches that slowly fill with red. The prince is smiling, not grimacing, not flinching, smiling because he thinks he is winning. William stops the game. He takes Baldwin aside. He presses his thumb deep into the boy's forearm, watching the skin blanch white under the pressure, waiting for the inevitable yelp of pain. It never comes. Baldwin looks at him with confusion, not understanding why the tutor looks so afraid. The diagnosis is immediate in William's mind. Leprosy. The word itself is a death sentence in the 12th century, but not in the way most people imagine. The disease does not kill quickly. It kills slowly, piece by piece, sense by sense, turning your body into a prison where the walls are closing in but you cannot feel them crushing you. William understands the political catastrophe he is witnessing. This boy is the heir to the throne of Jerusalem, the eldest son of king. If the diagnosis becomes public, the High Court will declare him unfit. They will pass over him for a younger sibling or a distant cousin. They will lock him away in a monastery or a leper colony, somewhere he can rot in privacy without embarrassing the kingdom. So William makes a choice that will alter the course of history. He tells no one, not the king, not the court physicians, not even Baldwin's mother. He watches the disease spread through the boy's right arm and into his hand, documenting it in private notes that will only surface after everyone involved is long dead. He watches Baldwin learn to write with his left hand when his right becomes too clumsy. He watches the boy adapt, compensate, and hide his weakness without even understanding what he is hiding from. For 4 years the secret holds. Baldwin grows into adolescence, increasingly aware that something is wrong but not yet understanding the magnitude. He knows his right hand is becoming useless. He knows he cannot feel pain in his arm anymore, which seems like an advantage until he looks down and sees burns and cuts he never noticed receiving. He thinks perhaps it is a temporary affliction, a curse that will lift. He is 12 years old. He still believes the world is fair. In 1174, King dies, not gloriously in battle but miserably of dysentery, spending his final days voiding his bowels while priests chant prayers that do nothing to ease the humiliation. The kingdom needs a new king immediately. Saladin is consolidating power in Egypt. The Saracen lords are watching for weakness. The high court cannot afford a succession crisis. They crown Baldwin in the Church of the Holy. He is 13 years old. The crown is too large for his head. The robes drag on the floor. He looks like a child wearing his father's clothes. But he is no longer a child. He is the king of Jerusalem, and the moment the crown touches his skull, he becomes responsible for the lives of every Christian in the Levant. The nobles swear their oaths of fealty. They kneel. They kiss his ring. And they are already planning how to govern around him, assuming he will be a puppet, a figurehead they can manipulate while they divide the real power among themselves. Of Tripoli, the most experienced military commander expects to be named regent. The family, wealthy and influential, expects to control the treasury. Everyone has a plan for how to use the boy king. What none of them understand yet is that Baldwin has been learning to survive his entire life. He has been hiding his weakness, compensating for his failing body, developing mental discipline that far exceeds his age. They see a sick child. They do not see the iron core that sickness has forged. The disease is now undeniable. By the time of the coronation, Baldwin's right hand is nearly useless. He cannot grip objects with any strength. He cannot feel temperature or texture. When he signs documents, he must watch his hand carefully, because he cannot tell if he is holding the quill too loosely or crushing it. He learns to sign his name quickly, before his hand cramps in ways he cannot feel but can see. The court physicians are finally brought in. They examine him in private and their diagnosis is unanimous. Advanced lepromatous leprosy, the most aggressive form. It attacks the peripheral nerves first, then works inward. The extremities die first. Fingers, toes, nose, ears. Then the eyes. Then the internal organs. The timeline varies, but for someone his age with symptoms this advanced, they give him perhaps 10 years. Maybe 15 if God is merciful. They recommend immediate isolation. They cite Levitical law, the biblical commands that lepers must live outside the community, must cover their faces, must call out unclean when anyone approaches. They suggest a comfortable residence outside Jerusalem, staffed with servants who will care for him until the end. They describe it as a kindness, a way to spare him the burden of rule. Baldwin listens to all of this. His face shows nothing. When they finish, he asks a single question: who will defend the kingdom while he is away? The physicians have no answer. This is not their concern. They are here to treat disease, not discuss military strategy. But Baldwin has already understood what they have not. The kingdom is not some abstract political entity that can survive without leadership. It is a thin strip of coastal cities and inland fortresses, surrounded by hostile Muslim territories that outnumber the Christian population 10 to 1. It survives only because the Muslim powers are divided among themselves. The moment they unify under a strong leader, the Crusader states will be swept into the sea. And that strong leader already exists. His name is ad-Din. The Europeans will corrupt this into Saladin. He is 37 years old, a Kurdish general who has risen to power in Egypt through a combination of military brilliance and political ruthlessness. He has spent the last decade consolidating his control over the Fatimid Caliphate, and now he is looking north toward Syria, planning to unite the Muslim world under his banner. Once he achieves that unity, Jerusalem will be his next target. Baldwin understands this with a clarity that terrifies him. He is 13, dying and responsible for preventing an apocalypse. He cannot hide in a comfortable exile. He cannot hand power to regents who will spend more time fighting each other than preparing for war. He must rule, personally, directly, until his body finally surrenders. So he tells the physicians no. He will not isolate. He will not step down. He will be king, in fact, not just in name. If they want to remove him, they will have to bring it before the High Court and explain why a dying boy is more dangerous than the political chaos of a disputed succession. The physicians leave, disturbed. They report to the senior nobles, expecting the court to intervene. But the nobles are paralyzed by their own self-interest. If they depose Baldwin, who replaces him? His younger sister is only 13, unmarried and female. His other sister Isabella is even younger. There is no clear adult male heir. Any attempt to remove Baldwin will fracture the kingdom into competing factions, each backing their own candidate. So they do nothing. They let the dying boy keep his crown, assuming he will fade quietly in a few months, saving them the trouble of a succession war. They make a catastrophic miscalculation. They assume that a body falling apart means a will falling apart. They do not understand that sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes, when everything else is stripped away, all that remains is will, pure, unbreakable, terrifying. Baldwin begins his education in kingship the way he began everything else in his life, by compensating for what his body cannot do. He cannot fight in tournaments to prove his martial skill. He cannot hunt to demonstrate his physical prowess. He cannot even shake hands without risking public notice of his condition, so he learns other skills. He learns how to read men, how to identify who lies and who tells truth, how to play nobles against each other, how to use the machinery of law and custom to consolidate power. He spends hours in council meetings, sitting perfectly still, hiding the exhaustion that comes from his body fighting itself. He forces himself to memorize every name, every title, every alliance and grudge. He cannot afford to appear weak or confused. Every hesitation will be interpreted as incapacity. Every mistake will be used as evidence that he should be removed. And all the while the disease advances. By 14, he has lost sensation in both hands. By 15, his feet are beginning to numb. He walks carefully now, watching the ground because he cannot feel if he is about to trip. He has learned to hide the limp that comes from not being able to feel whether his foot is properly planted. He is building a throne on decay. Every day he remains king is a day he has stolen from death. Every decision he makes is calculated with the knowledge that he might not live to see its consequences. He is not planning for a long reign. He is planning to do as much as possible in whatever time remains. And across the border, Saladin is watching. He has heard the rumors about the Leper King. He does not yet understand what he is dealing with. He thinks Jerusalem is weak, divided, ripe for conquest. He is planning his first major offensive, confident that it will be quick and decisive. He is about to learn that the most dangerous opponent is not the one who has nothing to fear, but the one who has already accepted that death is inevitable and chose to fight anyway. The transformation begins not with a battle, but with a saddle. By 1176, Baldwin is 15 years old. In medieval law, this makes him an adult. The regency is officially over. He now rules without any legal buffer between himself and the consequences of his decisions. The nobles who had been jockeying for position, assuming they would continue to govern through him, suddenly find themselves dealing with a king who gives direct orders and expects immediate obedience. But there is a practical problem that cannot be solved by willpower alone. A medieval king is expected to lead from horseback. The symbolism is everything. A king on foot is a king who looks like a peasant. A king carried in a litter looks like an invalid. But a king on a warhorse, visible above the masses, projecting power through sheer physical elevation, that is a king who can command armies. Baldwin's hands can barely grip reins anymore. The progression of nerve death has continued exactly as the physicians predicted. His fingers curl inward naturally now, and he must consciously straighten them, watching them move because he cannot feel whether they are obeying. The leather reins slip through his grasp. He has tried thick gloves, tried wrapping the reins around his wrists, but nothing works reliably. A warhorse is not a gentle riding animal. It is a trained weapon, responsive to the smallest pressure, and it requires constant control. So Baldwin learns a different way. He begins training with his master of horse, a grizzled veteran who served his father. They start with simple exercises. Baldwin sits in the saddle and practices steering the horse using only his legs. Pressure with the left knee to turn right. Pressure with the right knee to turn left. Squeezing with both thighs to command forward motion. Leaning back in the saddle to signal a stop. It sounds simple. It is not. A warhorse weighs more than 1,000 pounds and can reach speeds that will crush a man who falls beneath its hooves. Learning to control that much muscle and momentum without using your hands requires developing leg strength that borders on inhuman. Baldwin rides for hours every day, until his thighs cramp so badly he cannot walk afterward, until his groin is rubbed raw from gripping the saddle. The sensation in his legs is fatting too, but it fades unevenly. He still has enough feeling to know when his muscles are exhausted, even if he cannot feel the texture of the leather beneath him. He pushes through the exhaustion. There is no alternative. If he cannot ride, he cannot rule. By the time he is 16, he can control a horse in full gallop using only his knees and his body weight. His squires have developed a technique for mounting him. They lift him into the saddle, then strap his feet into the stirrups so he cannot accidentally slide out. It is humiliating being lifted like a child, but he has learned to separate humiliation from necessity. Pride is a luxury. Survival is essential. The sword presents a different problem. He can no longer grip a hilt with enough strength to keep the weapon from being knocked out of his hand in combat. Even if he could, his arm lacks the feeling necessary to adjust his grip mid-swing. The first time an enemy blade hits his sword, it will go flying, and he will be defenseless. So his armorers design a solution. They create a custom gauntlet for his right hand. The sword hilt is not gripped. It is locked into place with a series of leather straps and metal pins that bind the weapon directly to his arm. The sword becomes a fixed extension of his body. He cannot drop it. He also cannot let go of it. If he falls, the sword falls with him. If someone grabs the blade, they are grabbing him. He practices with this setup until the mechanics become instinct. He learns to compensate for the lack of wrist flexibility by using his entire arm as a single rigid lever. His strikes have less finesse than a healthy knight's, but they have the advantage of being completely committed. When Baldwin swings, the full force of his body is behind the blade, because the blade is part of his body. The nobles watch these adaptations with a mixture of fascination and horror. They see a boy turning himself into a machine, replacing failed flesh with iron and leather. Some admire his determination. Others find it grotesque, unnatural, but none of them can deny that it works. The king can ride. The king can fight. The physical requirements of medieval kingship have been met barely through sheer engineering and obsessive practice. While Baldwin is learning to compensate for his dying body, Saladin is finalizing his northern campaign. By 1176, the Sultan has secured Egypt completely. The Fatimid Caliphate is now under his absolute control. He has modernized the army, replacing unreliable mercenaries with professional cavalry and disciplined Kurdish infantry. His logistics are superior. His intelligence network is extensive. He knows the disposition of every crusader fortress, every trade route, every source of fresh water in the Levant. He decides to test the boy king with a limited offensive. Not a full invasion, just a probing raid into the valley, the fertile corridor that runs between the Lebanon and anti-Lebanon mountain ranges. It is prime agricultural land, supplying Damascus with grain and livestock. If Saladin can seize control of the valley, he cuts off a major food source for the Crusader territories and establishes a forward base for future operations. He assembles a force of approximately 5,000 cavalry and moves north from Damascus. It is summer. The heat is crushing. Most commanders would expect the Crusaders to stay inside their fortresses, conserving strength, waiting for the raiding party to exhaust itself and withdraw. This is basic defensive strategy when you are outnumbered. Baldwin does the opposite. The moment his scouts report the enemy movement, he mobilizes. He does not ask permission from the high court. He does not wait for the slow process of assembling the full feudal levy. He takes whoever is immediately available, roughly 800 knights and a few hundred infantry, and rides out to intercept. This is reckless. By every measure, this is tactically insane. He is outnumbered more than 6 to 1. He is leading men into the open desert in midsummer heat. He is abandoning the defensive advantage of castle walls. The senior nobles who remain in Jerusalem assume he has panicked, that his youth and inexperience have led him to make a suicidal mistake. But Baldwin has done the math differently. He knows Saladin is testing him. If he hides behind walls now, Saladin will interpret it as weakness and escalate. The raids will become invasions. The probing attacks will become sieges. Baldwin needs to send a message that the kingdom of Jerusalem under his rule will not passively absorb punishment. It will strike back, hard, fast, without warning. The Crusader force catches up to Saladin's raiders in the valley. The Saracen cavalry, expecting no resistance, have dispersed to pillage individual villages. They are spread out, vulnerable, overconfident. Baldwin does not wait for them to regroup. He orders an immediate charge. The impact is devastating. Medieval heavy cavalry, the Frankish knights in full armor on massive warhorses, function like living battering rams. When they hit a dispersed, unprepared enemy, the result is not a battle. It is a slaughter. The Saracen riders try to form up, try to organize a defense, but they are scattered across miles of terrain. Small groups of them are run down and killed before they can even mount their horses. Saladin's commanders, watching the disaster unfold, send urgent messengers to recall the raiding parties. But the damage is done. The Crusaders seize the supply train, burn the forage, and kill or capture hundreds of enemy soldiers. Then, before Saladin can bring his main force to bear, Baldwin withdraws. He does not chase glory. He does not overextend. He hits hard and vanishes, leaving the Sultan to count his losses and reconsider his assumptions about the invalid boy king. The raid into the valley is Baldwin's first independent military action, and it works perfectly. Not because he won a glorious battle, but because he understood the psychological dimension of warfare. Saladin was expecting a frightened child hiding behind walls. Instead, he encountered a predator who struck first and before taking damage. The Sultan's intelligence reports are now filled with confused accounts of a Leper King, who rides at the head of his cavalry, despite being unable to feel his own hands. When Baldwin returns to Jerusalem, the nobles who had been whispering about his incompetence fall silent. He has done what they said was impossible. He has led a successful offensive campaign. He has proven that his illness does not prevent him from commanding in the field. The political landscape shifts. The Regency Party, those who wanted to govern through him, loses influence. The War Party, those who want to take the fight to Saladin, gains power. But victory has a cost that no one else can see. The exertion of the campaign has accelerated his disease. The long hours in the saddle, the heat, the dehydration, all of it has stressed his failing body past its limits. When his servants remove his armor in private, they find blood and pus soaking through the bandages wrapped around his hands and feet. The pressure of the stirrups has created ulcers on his feet that he could not feel forming. The friction of the gauntlet straps has abraded his wrists down to raw meat. He cannot show weakness. He cannot rest. The moment he appears to falter, the vultures will return. So he hides the deterioration. He keeps his hands covered. He walks carefully to disguise the limp. He sits through council meetings with lesions on his back pressing against the chair, causing damage he will only discover later when servants peel away bandages stuck to torn flesh. The physicians beg him to slow down. They warn that he is burning through whatever time he has left. He ignores them. He has made a calculation that they cannot understand. He would rather have 5 years of active rule than 15 years of being paraded around as a symbol while others make the real decisions. He is choosing intensity over duration, a short, bright flame instead of a long, dim one. Saladin, meanwhile, is recalibrating. The Valley Raid taught him that the Crusaders under Baldwin are more aggressive than expected. He cannot simply bypass Jerusalem and focus on consolidating Syria. The boy king is forcing him to pay attention. So Saladin adjusts his strategy. He will continue his northern campaigns against Aleppo and Mosul, but he will keep a significant force near the Crusader border, ready to respond if Baldwin tries another surprise attack. This suits Baldwin perfectly. Every month that Saladin spends fighting fellow Muslims is a month the Kingdom of Jerusalem gains to prepare. Baldwin uses the breathing room to strengthen fortifications, negotiate alliances with the remaining independent Muslim emirates who fear Saladin's expansion, and most importantly, to train his army in the aggressive cavalry tactics that worked so well in the. He develops a military doctrine built around speed and surprise. Small, highly mobile forces that can strike deep into enemy territory and withdraw before the enemy can mass for a counterattack. It is the opposite of the traditional crusader strategy of holding castles and waiting. It is exhausting. It is risky. But it keeps the initiative with Jerusalem instead of with Saladin. For 1 year, this strategy works. Baldwin launches 3 more raids into Muslim territory. Each time he catches the enemy off guard. Each time he withdraws before suffering significant casualties. Each time, Saladin receives reports that make him increasingly angry and increasingly wary. The Sultan is being stung repeatedly by a dying teenager, and he cannot catch him. But both men know this cannot last. Saladin is getting stronger. City by city, he is unifying Syria. His army is growing. His logistics are improving. And Baldwin is getting weaker. The disease is spreading. By late 1177, he has lost most of the sensation in his legs. His face is beginning to show the telltale signs. Lesions around his nose and mouth. A slight asymmetry as the muscles on one side weaken faster than the other. The mathematics are stark. Saladin is ascending. Baldwin is descending. Somewhere those two trajectories will cross. When they do, there will be a reckoning. The game of raids and counter-raids will end. One side will commit everything to a single massive confrontation. One side will win. The other will cease to exist. In November of 1177, Saladin makes his decision. He will not wait for Baldwin to die naturally. He will not allow the boy to continue these humiliating raids. He will assemble the largest army he has ever commanded and crush the Kingdom of Jerusalem in one overwhelming campaign. He will march on the holy city itself and take it by force. He gathers 26,000 men, professional soldiers, veterans of a dozen campaigns, the finest cavalry in the Islamic world. He crosses the border from Egypt, moving north along the coast toward Jerusalem. His scouts report that Baldwin has taken his small mobile force to the fortress of, trying to defend the southern approach. Saladin smiles. The boy has made a mistake. He has divided his forces. Jerusalem is exposed. Saladin decides to bypass entirely. Why waste time besieging a fortress when the capital is undefended? He will march straight past the Leper King, take Jerusalem, and let Baldwin rot uselessly inside its walls while the kingdom falls around him. It is a brilliant strategic move. It should work. But Saladin has made one critical miscalculation. He has assumed that Baldwin thinks like a normal person. He has assumed the boy wants to survive. He does not understand that Baldwin stopped caring about survival years ago. All he cares about is winning. And you cannot threaten a man with death when he is already dying. Inside, Baldwin receives the news that Saladin is marching past him toward Jerusalem. He has a choice. Stay inside the fortress where it is safe, or open the gates and ride out with 500 men against 26,000. By every rational measure, riding out is suicide. By every rational measure, it is exactly what he is going to do. Calls for his horse. His servants strap him into the saddle. His sword is locked to his arm. He gives the order. The gates open, and the Leper King rides out to hunt the wolf, November 25, 1177. The sun is past its zenith, beginning its slow descent toward the Mediterranean. The air shimmers with heat even though it is technically autumn. In the desert lands of the Levant, seasons are measured not by temperature but by degrees of brutality. Summer will kill you in hours. Autumn merely makes you wish you were dead. Baldwin's force moves north from, shadowing Saladin's army from a distance. They stay low, using the terrain to hide their numbers. Not that their numbers would intimidate anyone. 500 knights against 26,000. The mathematics are so absurd that Saladin's scouts, when they report the Crusader movement, are dismissed as seeing phantoms. No commander would be insane enough to attack with those odds. Therefore, the reports must be exaggerated. Therefore, there is no threat. This is the advantage of being underestimated. People stop preparing for you. The Crusader column rides in near silence. No banners are flying. No trumpets announce their presence. The only sounds are the muffled thud of hooves on sand, the creak of leather, the occasional clink of metal on metal when a piece of armor shifts. The men are veterans. They know what they are riding toward. They have made their peace with it. At the front of the column, Baldwin sits rigidly in his saddle, his body locked in place by straps and willpower. The pain is extraordinary now. The nerves in his hands and feet are dead, yes, but the disease causes deep aching in the bones and joints, a pain that radiates from inside and has no relief. Every jostle of the horse sends shockwaves through his deteriorating skeleton. His jaw is clenched so tightly that his teeth are grinding audibly. But his eyes remain fixed on the horizon, scanning for the dust cloud that will indicate Saladin's position. They find it in the early afternoon, a vast brown smudge rising into the sky, visible from miles away. That much dust can only mean thousands of men and horses moving across dry ground. The column halts. Baldwin confers with his commanders. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar rides up beside him. The Templars are the special operations forces of the medieval world, warrior monks who have taken vows never to retreat, never to surrender, never to ransom themselves. They are either victorious or dead. There is no middle ground. Is a hard man who has spent decades fighting in the desert. He looks at the dust cloud, then at Baldwin, then back at the dust cloud. The odds are suicide, he says quietly. This is not a protest. It is simply a statement of fact. Baldwin nods. He knows, everyone knows, waits for the order. When it comes, he will obey without hesitation. That is what Templars do. But Baldwin does not give the order to charge yet. He is waiting for something specific. His scouts have been tracking Saladin's movements for hours, and they bring back a report that changes everything. The enemy army is not in battle formation. Saladin has allowed his troops to disperse for foraging. The tight military column has fragmented into dozens of smaller groups spread across miles of countryside. They are looting villages, loading camels with grain and livestock, filling water skins from wells. They are moving like an army that expects no resistance. More importantly, they are crossing a wadi, a seasonal riverbed that is currently dry but creates a natural choke point. To cross the wadi near the village the army must funnel through narrow passages between steep banks. On the far side, the ground opens up into a flat plain, but in the crossing itself, they are vulnerable, compressed, unable to maneuver. Baldwin's scouts estimate that roughly half of Saladin's army has already crossed. The other half is still on the southern side, waiting their turn. The Sultan himself is with the forward elements, already thinking about the siege of Jerusalem. He is not expecting combat today. His armor is probably still packed in the baggage train. His cavalry are watering their horses. His infantry are resting in the shade. This is the moment. If Baldwin waits, the opportunity passes. If he attacks now, he can hit the forward half of Saladin's army while the other half is separated by the wadi. He can turn a 26,000 against 500 fight into a 13,000 against 500 fight. The odds are still catastrophic, but they are survivable. Barely. But there is one more element to consider. Morale. Medieval warfare is not purely about numbers and tactics. It is about psychology. An army that believes it will win fights harder than an army that believes it will lose. And Baldwin has brought a weapon that transcends ordinary military hardware. He has brought a relic. The true cross, or rather, a fragment of wood encased in gold that is believed to be part of the cross on which Christ was. Whether it is genuine is irrelevant. What matters is that every man in the Crusader army believes it is genuine. To them, this is not just a piece of wood. It is a direct line to divine intervention. It is proof that God is watching. It is a guarantee that if they die here, They die as martyrs with their souls already reserved in paradise. The Bishop of Bethlehem, who has accompanied the army carrying the relic, brings it forward now. He holds it high so every man can see it. The gold casing catches the sunlight, blazing like a second sun. The knights, hardened killers who have seen things that would break ordinary men, kneel in the sand. Some are weeping. Some are praying. All of them know that they are moments away from probable death, and the presence of the cross transforms that death from a waste into a holy sacrifice. Baldwin dismounts. It is a slow, awkward process. His servants have to unbuckle the straps holding him in the saddle, then lower him carefully to the ground because his legs cannot reliably support his weight. He staggers, catches himself, and then lowers himself to his knees in front of the cross. His hands, wrapped in bandages that are already stained with blood and fluid, reach out toward the relic but do not touch it. He is unclean. He knows this. The law is clear. And then he does something that no one expects. He begins to cry, not the stoic, silent tears of a king trying to maintain dignity, real, choking sobs that shake his entire body. He is a boy again, a frightened child who never asked for this burden, who never wanted to be king, who just wanted to feel his own hand. For the first time in years, the armor of duty cracks and the human underneath is visible. He does not pray for victory. He prays for forgiveness. He begs God not to let the kingdom fall because of his sins, because of his impurity, because of his rotting flesh. He asks to be punished alone, not to drag his people into damnation with him. It is raw. It is vulnerable. It is the opposite of what a king is supposed to show his men before battle. But it works. The knights watch their broken king weeping in the sand, and something fundamental shifts in their hearts. They are not fighting for land anymore. They are not fighting for loot or glory or political advantage. They are fighting for him, for this boy who has suffered more than any of them, who has every reason to give up but refuses, who is about to ride into a battle he knows he cannot survive just to buy them one more day. When Baldwin finishes praying, the tears stop as suddenly as they started. His face hardens back into the mask he wears for the world. He allows his servants to lift him back onto his horse. They strap him in. They lock his sword to his gauntlet. He turns to face his men, and when he speaks, his voice carries across the desert silence with absolute clarity. He does not give a speech. He does not need to. He simply raises his bandaged hand and points toward the dust cloud on the horizon. The meaning is clear. There is the enemy. There is death. We ride. 500 lances lower into position. 500 visors slam shut. The horses begin to move, first at a walk, then a trot, then a canter. The sound of hooves builds like distant thunder. And then, as they crest the final ridge overlooking the wadi of, Baldwin drives his knees into his horse's flanks, and the thunder becomes an avalanche. The charge of a medieval heavy cavalry unit is not gradual. It is a binary state. You are either standing still or you are moving at the maximum speed a warhorse can sustain while carrying a fully armored knight. There is no in-between. When 500 of these units accelerate simultaneously downhill toward an unprepared enemy, the kinetic energy released is equivalent to a modern artillery barrage. The Saracen soldiers scattered across the plain have seconds to react. Most of them do not even understand what is happening at first. They hear the sound, a roar like an earthquake combined with a windstorm, and they look up to see a solid wall of steel and horseflesh bearing down on them at inhuman speed. Some try to run. Some try to grab weapons. Some simply freeze, their minds unable to process the impossibility of what they are seeing. The impact is not a battle. It is a catastrophe. The Crusader wedge punches through the dispersed Saracen lines like a lance through cloth. Men are trampled. Horses are bowled over. The momentum is so great that nothing can stop it. The first wave of Crusaders crashes through the enemy baggage train, scattering camels and supplies across the desert. The second wave drives directly into the camp where Saladin's commanders are trying desperately to organize a defense. At the center of this maelstrom rides Baldwin. Historical accounts differ on whether he is actively wielding his sword or simply guiding his horse while the true cross is held aloft beside him by the bishop. But the effect is the same. To the Muslim soldiers, this is not a military engagement. This is a supernatural event. The Leper King, who should be dead or hiding, is here, riding out of the blinding sun like an avenging angel. Panic spreads faster than any cavalry charge. The word rips through the Saracen ranks like wildfire. The leper is here. The cursed king has come. Men who have never seen Baldwin, who only know him from rumors and horror stories, believe they are facing a ghost. They believe they are being punished by God for some unnamed sin. They break. They run. And once a medieval army begins to rout, it cannot be stopped. The soldiers who are already across the wadi, the ones who thought they were safe, try to retreat back toward the river. But the narrow crossing that had been a minor inconvenience on the way north is now a death trap. Thousands of men try to squeeze through passages meant for hundreds. They jam together, unable to move forward or back. The Crusaders do not need to chase them. They simply push, and the mass of bodies ahead of them crushes itself. In the center of his army, Saladin realizes that he is losing. Not just the battle, the entire campaign. His soldiers are not fighting, they are fleeing. His carefully assembled invasion force is disintegrating in real time. He tries to rally his personal guard, the elite who are supposed to be the backbone of his army. They form a defensive circle around him, buying time with their lives. But there is no time to buy. The Crusaders are everywhere. The Templars, in particular, are methodical in their slaughter. They do not take prisoners. They do not stop to loot. They kill until there is nothing left to kill, and then they move to the next target. Saladin's bodyguards die one by one, holding the line just long enough for their sultan to escape. Saladin does not escape on his warhorse. The historical sources are brutally specific about this detail. In the chaos and panic, he cannot reach his horse. He throws himself onto a racing camel, an animal bred for speed over distance but completely unsuitable for warfare. He flees into the desert with only a handful of survivors, leaving behind his army, his supplies, his siege equipment, and his reputation. The slaughter continues until nightfall. When it finally stops, the magnitude of the disaster becomes clear. Of the 26,000 men Saladin brought into the kingdom of Jerusalem, fewer than a tenth escape alive. The rest are dead or captured. The Crusaders seize the entire enemy camp. Tents, food, weapons, gold, prisoners. It is the greatest military windfall in the history of the kingdom. But for Baldwin, the cost is measured differently. The adrenaline that sustained him through the charge is fading now. The reality of what he has done to his body is becoming apparent. He has ridden for hours in full armor in desert heat. He has pushed his failing body past every limit the physicians said was survivable. The friction of the saddle has abraded his skin down to the bone in places he cannot feel. His hands are swelling inside his gauntlets, the tissue damage so severe that when the armor is finally cut away, the gloves come off with strips of skin still attached. He is carried back to Jerusalem not as a conqueror on a white horse, but as a broken thing wrapped in bloody bandages, barely conscious, sustained only by the knowledge that he won. The city erupts in celebration. Bells ring. People flood the streets. They kneel as his litter passes, some believing they have witnessed a miracle, that the Leper King has been touched by God and transformed into an instrument of divine will. In the privacy of his chambers, away from the cheering crowds, the truth is far less miraculous. The physicians examine him and deliver their verdict. The exertion has accelerated his condition by months, possibly years. The lesions on his face are spreading. The numbness is creeping further into his core. He has traded a significant portion of his remaining life for one day of victory. He accepts this without protest. He understands the exchange he made. He bought his kingdom time. How much time, no one knows, but it is more time than they would have had if he had stayed in, more time to prepare, more time to find an heir, more time to strengthen the defenses before Saladin recovers and returns. Because Saladin will return. Baldwin knows this with absolute certainty. The Sultan has been humiliated in the worst possible way. His pride has been shattered by a dying teenager. He will spend the rest of his life trying to erase the memory of. He will raise new armies. He will invade again. And next time, he will not make the mistake of underestimating the Leper King. But for now, for this brief window, Jerusalem is safe. The bells continue to ring. The people continue to celebrate. And in a darkened room, a boy who cannot feel his own hands lies in bed and calculates how many more times he can do this before his body finally surrenders. The answer, he suspects, is not many. Victory does not cure Baldwin. It accelerates his decline. By 1178, a year after the battle, the transformation is undeniable. The disease has moved from his extremities into his face. The cartilage in his nose is collapsing. His lips are retracting, exposing teeth and gums in a permanent grimace. The muscles around his eyes are weakening, leaving his eyelids partially paralyzed. He can no longer blink properly, which means his eyes dry out, ulcerate, and slowly cloud over with scar tissue. He begins wearing heavy veils in public, not a silver mask like the movies imagine, just layers of silk draped across his face, hiding the destruction underneath. The veils make breathing difficult in the desert heat. They make speaking harder, but they preserve the fiction that the king is merely ill, not actively decomposing. The smell becomes impossible to hide. As the tissue in his extremities dies, gangrene sets in. The physicians try everything. They pack the wounds with honey, which has natural antibacterial properties but does nothing against the underlying nerve death. They burn incense constantly in the throne room. They drench his bandages in perfume. None of it works. Anyone who stands within 10 feet of the king knows they are standing next to rotting flesh. This creates a psychological isolation more profound than any dungeon. Baldwin is 20 years old. He has the same desires as any young man, but he is untouchable. To touch him is to risk contamination, at least in the medieval understanding of disease. He will never feel the touch of a woman. He will never father children. He will never even shake hands with an ally without seeing them flinch. The loneliness of it is crushing. He is surrounded by people constantly. Servants dress him. Physicians examine him. Guards stand outside his door, but none of them see him as a person. They see a walking corpse, a temporary obstacle between them and the real power they will wield once he is dead. He can see it in their eyes, the calculation, the waiting. But his mind remains sharp. Sharper, perhaps, because there is nothing left to distract him. No physical pleasures, no hope of a normal life, just politics and war and the grinding mathematics of survival. He attends every council meeting. When he can no longer walk, he has servants carry him in. When he can no longer hold documents, he has them read aloud. When his vision fails completely, he memorizes voices so he knows who is speaking without seeing them. He governs through sheer force of will, but he knows he cannot govern forever. He needs an heir. Specifically, he needs a strong male heir who can take over military command when he becomes too weak to continue. His sisters are his only option. The older one is the key to the succession. Whoever she marries will eventually rule Jerusalem. This is where Baldwin makes his fatal mistake. In 1180, desperate and dying, he consents to marriage to Guy. Guy is a French nobleman of minor importance, handsome and well-mannered but utterly devoid of military competence. Loves him, or at least claims to. Baldwin, in a moment of weakness, allows emotion to override strategy. It is a decision he will regret immediately. The moment Guy gains proximity to power, the careful balance Baldwin has maintained begins to collapse. The court splits into factions. The old nobility, the families who have lived in the East for generations and understand how to coexist with Muslim neighbors, despise Guy. They see him as an arrogant outsider. The newer arrivals, the fortune seekers and adventurers from Europe, support him. They see a king who looks like a king, not a rotting invalid. Baldwin watches this fracture with growing horror. He realizes he has handed the kingdom to a fool, but it is too late to undo the marriage without causing a succession crisis. So he tries to manage Guy to limit his power to surround him with competent advisors. It does not work. Guy ignores advice. He makes decisions based on pride rather than strategy. And Saladin, watching from across the border, sees the change immediately. The Sultan has spent the years since rebuilding. He has unified Syria completely now. Aleppo has fallen. Mosul has fallen. The Muslim world is united under his banner. He commands resources that dwarf the Crusader states, and he knows that the Leper King is dying. He just needs to wait. In 1183, Saladin tests the new leadership. He crosses the Jordan River with a large force and burns his way through the Galilee. It is a deliberate provocation. He is daring the Crusaders to come out and fight. Guy, now serving as regent because Baldwin is too weak to campaign, musters the army, the largest Crusader force ever assembled, every available knight, every foot soldier, every resource the kingdom can spare. They march to the pools of Goliath and take up a strong defensive position. They have the high ground. They control the water sources. Saladin's army is exposed below them. The veteran commanders, men who fought at, grip their weapons and wait for the order to charge. They wait for hours. The order never comes. Guy freezes. Whether from cowardice or indecision, he refuses to engage. He stands there, paralyzed, while Saladin's army loots the countryside below and then withdraws unmolested. It is not a defeat. It is something worse. It is a humiliation. The army returns to Jerusalem in disgrace, having accomplished nothing except proving that the new leadership is incompetent. When Baldwin hears the news, his fury is absolute. He is blind now, bedridden, unable to hold a pen or walk or eat solid food. But his mind still functions, and he understands what Guy's failure means. Saladin now knows that the kingdom can be beaten, not through superior numbers or tactics, but simply through patience. Wait for the Leper King to die. Wait for Guy to take full power. Then strike. Baldwin summons the High Court from his deathbed. It takes hours to prepare him for the meeting. Servants must carry him to the council chamber. They must prop him upright in his chair. They must arrange the veils over his face so that the worst of the damage is hidden. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely a whisper. But every man in the room strains to hear, because they know this is the last time the true king will address them. He orders Guy stripped of the regency. It is a political earthquake. Guy, humiliated, flees to his estates and refuses to hand over control of the city. But Baldwin is not done. He has one final move to make. He turns to his nephew, son from her first marriage, a child of 5 years old. The boy is also named Baldwin. In November 1183, the child is crowned Baldwin IV in the Church of the Holy. But the ceremony is bizarre, surreal. The dying king is carried in on a litter. He is too weak to stand for the coronation. He lies in the shadows while the crown is placed on the head of a confused 5-year-old child. The boy is too small to be seen by the assembled nobles. So a knight who represents the best of Crusader ideals lifts the child onto his shoulders. The entire ceremony is conducted with the future king sitting on a knight's shoulders like a child at a festival, while the present king lies dying on a stretcher nearby. It is grotesque. It is desperate. It is Baldwin's final attempt to build a wall around the succession to keep Guy out. He appoints of Tripoli as regent for the child. He makes the nobles swear that Guy will never rule. He is trying to govern from beyond the grave before he even reaches it. But fate has other plans. In late 1183, Saladin launches another attack. This time he targets a massive fortress east of the Dead Sea. He chooses his timing carefully. There is a royal wedding taking place inside the castle. Princess Isabella, Baldwin's half-sister, is marrying Humphrey of. While the guests dance and feast, Saladin's siege engines begin their bombardment. The historical sources record a strange moment of chivalric courtesy in the middle of the violence. The mother of the groom sends plates of food from the wedding feast out to Saladin's tent. A message: the bride and groom greet you. Saladin responds by asking which tower the newlyweds are sleeping in. Once told, he orders his engineers to aim everywhere except that tower. So while the rest of the fortress crumbles under bombardment, the bridal suite remains untouched. But courtesy does not lift sieges. The garrison is trapped. They send desperate messages to Jerusalem begging for relief. The signal fires are lit. The kingdom mobilizes. But who will lead the army? Guy has been disgraced. The other barons are arguing among themselves. There is only one man with the authority to unite them. Baldwin orders his servants to prepare him for travel. He cannot sit a horse. He cannot sit upright in a wagon. So they construct a litter, a stretcher suspended between two horses. He is carried out of Jerusalem at the head of the army, a box with curtains, swaying in the desert heat. Inside lies a blind, dying man whose body has decayed so far that he is barely recognizable as human, but his presence alone holds the army together. When Saladin's scouts report that the Leper King is personally commanding the relief force, they bring the news to the Sultan's tent with obvious fear. Saladin sits in silence for a long moment. He has superior numbers. He has the stronger position. He could force a battle and probably win. But he knows what happened at. He knows that the Crusader army, when led by Baldwin, fights with a fanaticism that transcends normal military calculation. Saladin lifts the siege. He packs up his equipment and withdraws, not because he is afraid of 500 knights, but because he understands that fighting an army that believes its king is a martyred saint will cost more than the victory is worth. He retreats, and Baldwin is carried into not as a conqueror but as a savior. The journey back to Jerusalem destroys what little remains of Baldwin's health. The fever consumes him. The infection reaches his internal organs. By the time he returns to the capital, he knows he is days away from death. The physicians can do nothing. The priests arrive to administer last rites. The vultures begin to circle. On March 16, 1185, Baldwin IV dies. He is 24 years old. He has reigned for 11 years. Every medical prediction said he would be dead within months of his diagnosis at age 9. He survived 15 years past that prediction through sheer refusal to surrender. But biology always wins eventually. His death is not tragic, it is merciful. For the first time in over a decade, he is not in pain. He is buried in the Church of the Holy, near the site of Christ's crucifixion. The symbolism is deliberate. A king who suffered in his flesh, buried beside the place where God supposedly suffered in his. But while Baldwin finds peace, his kingdom finds chaos. The moment his heart stops, the careful structure he built to protect Jerusalem collapses. According to his will, the crown passes to his nephew, little Baldwin IV, with of Tripoli as regent. For 1 year the arrangement holds. Saladin, respecting the truce he signed with Baldwin IV, stays his hand. Then in the summer of 1186, the child king dies. He is 9 years old. No one is certain if it was disease or poison. The throne is empty. The succession crisis Baldwin spent his life trying to prevent finally arrives. Is the rightful heir. The High Court agrees to crown her on one condition. She must divorce Guy and choose a new husband. Someone competent, someone who can lead armies, agrees. She swears a solemn oath. The nobles, relieved, proceed with the coronation. Then plays her hand. Standing before the assembled court, crown on her head, she announces her choice for a new husband. Guy. She removes her own crown and places it on his head. It is a political and a military disaster. She has tricked the High Court into giving absolute power to the man Baldwin spent his dying days trying to block. The competent nobles refuse to serve Guy. One of Baldwin's most loyal commanders goes into self-imposed exile rather than watch the kingdom fall. But a rogue baron who is essentially a medieval war criminal thrives under Guy's weak leadership. In 1187, attacks a Muslim caravan traveling between Cairo and Damascus. He slaughters the merchants and throws the survivors into his dungeons. Saladin demands the prisoners back. Guy, terrified does nothing. The Sultan has his excuse. The truce is broken. The Leper King is dead. The barrier is gone. Saladin declares jihad and summons every warrior from Egypt to Syria. This is not a raid. This is the endgame. In July 1187, the vast Saracen army crosses into Crusader territory. Guy, ignoring every defensive strategy Baldwin ever used, marches out to meet them. He leads his army away from water sources, across the barren plateau toward. It is the height of summer. The heat is murderous. Saladin watches this tactical suicide unfold and orders his men to set fire to the dry brush surrounding the Crusaders. The Battle of is not a battle, it is an execution. The Christian army, dehydrated and choking on smoke, is slaughtered. The true cross, the relic Baldwin wept before at, is captured. King Guy is taken prisoner. The army of Jerusalem ceases to exist. With no military force left to defend it, Jerusalem falls in October 1187. Of the last competent noble organizes a desperate defense. He knights every boy over 16. He arms the merchants. But it is hopeless. Saladin's army breaches the walls within 2 weeks. The city surrenders, but Saladin, in a final demonstration of character, does not massacre the population. He allows Christians to ransom themselves. Those who can pay walk free. Those who cannot are enslaved but not killed. It is mercy by medieval standards. The churches are converted to mosques or left standing. The Church of the Holy is briefly closed, then reopened. Saladin walks through the conquered city. He visits the tomb of Baldwin IV. The sources do not record what he thinks, but he leaves it untouched. He does not desecrate the grave of his greatest enemy. It is a silent acknowledgement from one warrior to another. You were worthy. The kingdom of Jerusalem, as Baldwin knew it, is gone. It survived 88 years from its founding in 1099 to its fall in 1187. In the end, it was not destroyed by superior Muslim forces. It was destroyed by the incompetence of Christian leadership that failed to heed the lessons taught by a dying boy. Baldwin held the kingdom together with hands that could not feel. Guy tore it apart with hands that could. The mathematics are that simple. The tragedy is that stark. Today, 9 centuries later, Baldwin IV has achieved a strange immortality. He appears in video games. He trends on social media. Clips from movies about him are set to electronic music and shared millions of times. Young men call him a Sigma male, whatever that means. They see him as a symbol of willpower overcoming adversity. But these modern myths miss something essential. They focus on the strength and ignore the cost. Yes, Baldwin refused to surrender. Yes, he rode into battle when he should have been bedridden. But he paid for every victory with pieces of his body. Every triumph accelerated his decay. He did not overcome his disease. He just refused to let it stop him from doing what needed to be done. The silver mask that appears in movies is a Hollywood invention. The real Baldwin hid his face behind veils because his nose had collapsed, and his lips had retracted, and looking at him caused people to recoil in horror. He wrapped his hands in bandages that were constantly soaked with blood and pus. He was carried into battles on a litter because he could no longer sit a horse without being strapped in place. This is not heroic. This is desperate. But desperation does not mean weakness. Baldwin teaches a lesson that the modern world has largely forgotten. You do not need to be whole to be useful. You do not need to be healthy to lead. You do not need to overcome your limitations. You just need to function despite them. He shows us that authority comes not from physical strength but from presence. From the willingness to suffer alongside your people rather than hiding from suffering. Jerusalem fell 2 years after he died. Would it have survived if he had lived longer? Probably not. Saladin was too strong. The Crusader states were too divided. The mathematics were always against them, but Baldwin bought time. He forced Saladin to respect the Crusaders as opponents rather than treating them as targets. He held the kingdom together long enough for one more generation to be born, live, and die in relative peace. That is not nothing. That is everything a dying king could have done. So when you feel overwhelmed by circumstances beyond your control, remember the boy who lost the ability to feel his own hand at age 9 and still managed to hold a kingdom together for 15 years. Remember that he did not defeat his disease. He just refused to let it defeat him first. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is continue functioning when every part of you wants to stop. And remember that history does not care about your excuses. It only cares about what you did with the time you had. If this examination of Baldwin's true cost and legacy resonated with you, let others find this story by hitting that like button. Subscribe to Master Historians for more history that refuses to soften the edges. And in the comments, tell me, do you think Baldwin's suffering was worth the 2 extra years he bought for Jerusalem? Or should he have stepped down and lived longer in obscurity? The answer is not as simple as it seems. Thank you for walking through this darkness with me. Some stories demand to be told exactly as they were, without mercy and without lies.